Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans. Welcome to The Bunker. You join me for part one of my thoughts on the 2021 annual meeting. The annual meeting is an elite annual event that's basically for the top brass of Jehovah's Witnesses. And this event took place on October 2nd, 2021. It was for a select audience. Quite frankly, you should not be watching this material yet. So this material that we're about to look at is due for release, or isn't due for release until January 2022. It's just that Watchtower inadvertently leaked it by streaming the material for, again, a select audience. So you could attend in person, or you could be given a link, a stream link, to tune in and watch the event remotely. This was not for all Jehovah's Witnesses. This was for only specific individuals. But guess what? This special link found its way to ex-Jehovah's Witness activists and ultimately to yours truly. There was some remarkable material over the course of well over 4 hours, I think 4 hours, 15 minutes or so, of talks, of video segments. And some of this material really highlights the control of the organization and also, quite frankly, the nonsensical beliefs that Jehovah's Witnesses have to accept. So I've dropped everything, Tibor's dropped everything, we've come together and we've put this rebuttal together. We're going to have to do it in 4 parts because there's so much to talk about. And that being the case, let's get part 1 underway. Let's roll the first clip.
Dear brothers and sisters, welcome. Welcome to the annual meeting of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Pennsylvania. Our program today is originating from the world headquarters at Warwick, but we are delighted to have live audiences at the various United States Bethel locations. All in attendance are fully vaccinated Bethel family members in accordance with government guidelines for this region of the United States. However, it also gives us great pleasure to welcome all of those who are tied in for this program virtually. Would you like to welcome all of them? Well, I've seen many annual meeting audiences, but I have to say you're the most beautiful audience I have seen for a variety of reasons. Before we begin, we have one short announcement. We'd like to remind you that no video streaming or recordings of any kind are permitted. Any notes taken, whether hard copy or electronic, should not be forwarded to anyone else.
Oops, it seems that guidance on keeping things secret, not sharing recordings, wasn't fully followed by some of the beautiful audience who were attending virtually via live stream. We're watching Mark Sanderson, who is acting as chair for the annual meeting. So he's actually going to be featured throughout parts 1 and 2 of this rebuttal because he has many comments to make, not just his introductory comments, but he has comments to make throughout when he's reacting to what various speakers are saying. I just find his style a bit self-indulgent. You can tell he's really loving, really relishing the role of chairing this prestigious annual meeting event. For example, you'll have seen where he said,
I have to say, you're the most beautiful audience I have seen for a variety of reasons.
What reasons? I mean, having said that, it kind of behooves you to specify exactly for what reasons this is the most beautiful annual meeting audience. If I had to guess, this is something personal. This is perhaps because he has family in the audience, or could it be, and this is really spitballing, could it be that Mark Sanderson, who famously is the single one on the governing body, is now dating or in a relationship and his partner is in the audience? And he is indulging that person by weaving them in some way in his introductory comments. That's what it feels like. It feels like, and I'm not saying that's the reason, but whatever reason it is, this for me feels like he's using his position and he's using the fact that he is chair of this event to make it somehow about him and to make it somehow about the way he feels about the audience.
Proverbs 15, verse 23, it says, "A word spoken at the right time, how good it is." Truly, it is a fundamental principle that timing is everything. Well, think for a moment about prophesied events that took place right on time. Jesus was baptized at precisely the time when the Messiah was prophesied to appear. The kingdom began its heavenly rule right on time in 1914. And looking to the future, Jesus said that Jehovah has set the time, even the exact day and the hour, for the end of this wicked system of things. Does the governing body know when Armageddon is going to come? Yes, we do. It's going to come right on time. We have full confidence in that, don't we? That Jehovah is going to bring about those earth-shaking events exactly on time.
For me, Mark Sanderson is toying with his audience here. Again, you can tell he really relishes the role he's been given. Number one, he loves being a governing body member. He loves the power that comes with that. And in this particular instance, on this occasion, he loves the power of being the chairperson at this prestigious event. And yeah, he's using it to toy with his audience on the subject of Armageddon. When's Armageddon coming? Because this is the sort of event where new light is typically dispensed by the faithful slave. So Jehovah's Witnesses will be watching this, and people will be attending this meeting thinking, maybe I'm going to learn something new. Maybe I will get a front row seat when some announcement is made about Armageddon that will somehow sharpen our understanding of when it's going to happen. Mark Sanderson knows that these are the expectations, and with this in mind, he says,
does the governing body know when Armageddon is going to come? Yes, we do. It's going to come right on time.
I mean, for all the laughter, what he's doing here is actually quite cruel, because Armageddon is a serious thing for many, many people. It's not a subject to be joked about. I can imagine there being plenty of fatigue among the millions of Jehovah's Witnesses when it comes to this constant waiting for something that's just never going to happen. I mean, we're talking generation after generation of Jehovah's Witnesses waiting for Armageddon to come, and it's just not coming. So while I'm glad his audience there at World Headquarters could see the funny side, I'm sure many won't. I'm sure many will think, do you know that this is a con? Do you know that it's not coming? Because why is this a subject for mirth? We're talking about the destruction of the wicked. We're talking about unfathomable destruction and carnage. And we're talking about people orienting their lives around an expectation that this is going to happen soon and they need to do something about it. So I'm not sure his, again, toying with the audience was in such good taste. As to his remarks on God's timing,
Jesus was baptized at precisely the time when the Messiah was prophesied to appear. The kingdom began its heavenly rule right on time in 1914.
I'm glad we're reaching the point where I've made so many videos at this point that I don't need to answer each and every falsehood that gets uttered by governing body members or governing body helpers in Jehovah's Witness propaganda. We're reaching the point where they just repeat the same falsehoods again and again and again, so that I don't need to repeat myself. I can just point to the video where I've already dismantled the lie. And we've had two lies here. Lie number one: Jesus was baptized at precisely the time when the Messiah was prophesied to appear. I refer you to a video I made, well, actually a sushi on this subject. If Tibor is gracious, a thumbnail will appear, in which I explain why Daniel's 70 weeks prophecy doesn't apply to Jesus. So that's lie number one dealt with. This is great. Lie number two: the kingdom began its heavenly rule right on time in 1914. I refer you to a recent video I made, again, thumbnail here if Tibor is gracious, debunking Jehovah's Witness teachings surrounding 1914.
Let's look at Matthew chapter 24 and verse 45. Now here, Jesus posed this question: who really is the faithful and discreet slave whom his master appointed over his domestics to give them their food at the proper time? Happy is that slave if his master, on coming, finds him doing so. Truly, I say to you, he will appoint him over all his belongings. Well, what did Jesus say here? He said he would appoint a faithful and discreet slave who would provide the spiritual food. But there's another important detail there. Did you notice it? He added, at the proper time. Well, because of Jehovah's perfect sense of time, he knows exactly what his people need, and he knows exactly the right time to provide it.
It could be that this is your first annual meeting. I've seen a few of them by this point, and I'm noticing a recurring theme. This whole repeated emphasis on the faithful and discreet slave, on Matthew 24, verse 45. It's almost as though it's like this ritual at these annual meetings. Once they have all their friends there, once they have the top brass there surrounding them, the governing body like to just re-emphasize their power and re-emphasize their control by pointing to the Bible verse that they feel gives them a mandate, gives them some reason to control the lives of Jehovah's Witnesses in such far-reaching and intimate ways. Matthew 24, verse 45 is their go-to verse, even though it's nowhere near giving them an excuse to do what they do on the scale they're doing it. It's not even a prophecy, it's a parable. But because it says something that could be construed as giving them an excuse to do what they do, giving them an excuse to micromanage the lives of Jehovah's Witnesses, it's their favorite verse, and they will trot it out at every opportunity, especially events like the annual meeting, which is essentially all about celebrating them and their achievements.
Just as World War II was erupting, the November 1st, 1939 issue of the Watchtower featured an in-depth discussion of the topic of neutrality. That timing was absolutely perfect. Because of those articles, our brothers worldwide knew exactly what to do as the war engulfed the entire planet. Well, after the war, as the organization was rapidly growing, Jehovah's organization arranged large international conventions that were held in New York City. In 1958, 250,000 people, can you imagine, overflowed Yankee Stadium and the Polo Grounds. Were any of you there? Well, it's so wonderful. We still have a few people there. It's not that I wasn't in the truth at that time. It's just I wasn't in the world at that time. Well, that amazing convention came just on time. It energized God's people, and we could say it put Jehovah's Witnesses on the map. It was hard to ignore a convention of 250,000 people. Well, fast forward to 2020, and a time when the world was engulfed in a global pandemic. Large gatherings were prohibited in most countries. Could we go to Yankee Stadium and have 250,000 people? No. But right on time, Jehovah guided the faithful and discreet slave so that our worldwide brotherhood could enjoy the convention program from home. Truly, spiritual food at the proper time.
We're watching Mark Sanderson's introductory comments at the 2021 annual meeting, and wow, he is rewriting history here, folks. Such is his enthusiasm to prove the power and control and authority of the faithful slave. He's just making things up at this point. So he gives 3 examples from history of Jehovah supposedly maneuvering the leadership of the organization, the Jehovah's Witness organization, so that they make exactly the right decision at exactly the right time. I'm going to focus just on what he said about World War II and the pandemic, because I don't see how anything he said about Yankee Stadium speaks about timing. I mean, what was it specifically about 1958 that made it important for there to be 250,000 people at Yankee Stadium and in the surrounding area? Objectively, there's no relevance to that other than the largeness of the event. And if that's his sole argument, which it seems to be, oh, it put us on the map. Well, does that mean that we can point to any religious event that's well attended and say that that's something that we should take notice of? God could be somehow involved in this event because, wow, look at how many thousands of people are attending. It's a self-evidently stupid argument. I'm going to ignore it, and I'm going to focus just on what Mark Sanderson says about World War II and the pandemic. Mark Sanderson talks about the fact that the November 1st, 1939 Watchtower was discussing neutrality. So neutrality, from a Jehovah's Witness perspective, involves not getting involved in Satan's system, in Satan's political system, staying out of it. It's not just about conscientious objection, which seems to be what he's alluding to here. It's also any kind of involvement, any kind of interest, you could say, in what's happening on the political stage worldwide. I would argue that actually, when you look throughout history, you can see that there have been examples of where the organization has gotten involved or has shown an interest in what Satan's political system is doing. And I will come to those examples. But let's just think about the specific claim here. November 1st, 1939, that was the date on the Watchtower article that Mark Sanderson is pointing to as evidence of timing that is, quote, absolutely perfect.
That timing was absolutely perfect.
Well, in order to judge how absolutely perfect the timing of this article was, we really need to know 2 things, don't we? We need to know when World War II erupted, and we need to know when the article was written. It's one thing for it to say November 1st on the front of the magazine, but when was it actually written? What did the writers know about what was going on in the world at that time? So World War II erupted September 1st. September 1st was when Germany invaded Poland. Now, September 1st is 2 months prior to the date of the Watchtower magazine in question, namely November 1st. Now, as it happens, Jehovah's Witnesses tend to receive their magazines months in advance of the date that is on the magazine. I can only assume that was also the case going back to the 1930s. So it's difficult to say, really, based purely on the date of the magazine, what the writers knew. But what we can do, of course, is actually look at the magazine, which is not something you can do easily when you're a Jehovah's Witness using only Jehovah's Witness resources, because they don't allow access to materials from the 1930s on jw.org. Here is the magazine in question, The Watchtower Announcing Jehovah's Kingdom, November 1st, 1939. You can see there the headline article is Neutrality. What do we see in paragraph 5? There is now war among some of the nations of earth. Some of the nations not actually at war have declared their neutrality. So there is now war among some of the nations of earth. We can confidently say the writers of this article, actually, I think we can say the writer was Joseph Rutherford. But let's, for argument's sake, say writers. We can say the writers of this article knew that the war had broken out, or the war had broken out at the point that this was being written. So when we're thinking about the timing being absolutely perfect, it seems that although they were responding relatively quickly, they were still behind the curve. Now, let's be clear. This article could have been written before Germany invaded Poland, before September 1st, 1939, and it still wouldn't be proof that God was steering the organization, because all you'd really need to do as a writer, if you're Joseph Rutherford, for example, is keep an eye on what's going on around the world, see that Germany is militarizing, see that there's trouble with Japan and Italy and what have you, and see that war is inevitable, or if there were to be a war, anticipate what the response would be. It still wouldn't be evidence, would it, of the organization being steered by God, even if the article had been written before the outbreak of war. But what we have when we look at the article itself, which again, the organization apparently is reticent for Jehovah's Witnesses to do, is we see that this was actually written after the outbreak of war. And then you have to ask, well, what's so absolutely perfect? Isn't this just a human organization responding to a global event? But let's think about neutrality more broadly and the stance that the organization has taken regarding neutrality over the years. I would point you to a video I've made on the United Nations and the fact that Jehovah's Witnesses were actually involved with the United Nations for 9 years as a non-governmental organization, an NGO. Check out that video if you haven't done so already. What does that say about the organization's track record on neutrality? And furthermore, allow me to read a few paragraphs from the June 1st, 1918 Watchtower, which coincidentally was the Watchtower that announced the arrest of J.F. Rutherford. So Rutherford and his associates were arrested in 1918. They were later released in 1919, and all of this was subsequently given this great prophetic significance in the organization's theology. So quite an interesting Watchtower article for that reason. But allow me to read to you from where it says May 30th for prayer and supplication. In accordance with the resolution of Congress of April 2nd, and with the proclamation of the President of the United States of May 11th, it is suggested that the Lord's people everywhere make May 30th a day of prayer and supplication. God was graciously pleased to cause this nation to be formed and to grow under the most favorable conditions in the world for the preservation of liberty, civil and religious. This is the land divinely shadowed with wings, overshadowed by the providential watch care of God's word, where God has lifted up an ensign on the mountain, kingdom, and where he has blown the trumpet message of the truth. Here the love of truth has for 300 years attracted from all quarters of the world people who love God, love the Bible, and love religious liberty. Here, practically alone of all the nations, exists in the fundamental laws of the land the safeguard that so long as the Constitution stands, no law may be made nor any governmental action taken prohibiting the exercise of religion or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. Countless blessings have flowed to devout people through the wise provisions of the laws of the United States, blessings whose influences have been felt to the remotest corners of the earth, wherever even a spark of love for God-given freedom might be fanned into a glow. And I'm going to skip further to the end. Let there be praise and thanksgiving to God for the promised glorious outcome of the war, the breaking of the shackles of autocracy, the freeing of the captives, and the making of the world safe for the common people, blessings all assured by the word of God to the people of this country and of the whole world of mankind. Where's the neutrality there, Watchtower? Again, this is the magazine that announces that Rutherford and his associates have been arrested. A historic magazine. And here it is inducing all readers to participate in a day of prayer and supplication for a favorable outcome in the war for the United States, and waxing lyrical about the role of the United States in divine worship. So quite a remarkable article, and I feel it's important to draw your attention to it if you didn't know about it already. Mark Sanderson can talk about neutrality all he likes, but he must know about this article. He must know about it. And it's incredibly disingenuous for him to stand on the annual meeting platform and present this fake history where the organization's always been neutral and has always been right on time in telling God's people to be neutral, while the facts say otherwise. As to what he says about the pandemic...
Could we go to Yankee Stadium and have 250,000 people? No. But right on time, Jehovah guided the faithful and discreet slave so that our worldwide brotherhood could enjoy the convention program from home. Truly, spiritual food at the proper time.
It was right on time that Jehovah guided the governing body to cancel the convention program, to arrange for it to be viewed at home in the Always Rejoice convention. Right on time. The problem is, Mark Sanderson is here rewriting very recent history. It's easier to rewrite history when it's further in the past. When he's making remarks about World War II, it's easy for people to just go along with it, because unless you're going to fact check, you're just going to go along with it, aren't you? And you're just going to think, well, yeah, good point. Yeah, God was really right on time there, and God was clearly guiding the organization. He's now talking about recent events. And the facts, again, don't line up with what he's saying. As we're going to see, on this annual meeting program, it was April 1st, 2020, when the conventions got cancelled. And I remember because I covered it on the channel. When was the pandemic announced? The World Health Organization announced the coronavirus pandemic on March 11th. 3 weeks before the conventions got cancelled. And don't get me wrong, I'm glad they were cancelled. And I'm glad that none of them went ahead and later got cancelled. I'm glad it was done relatively early, but right on time. I mean, again, when you fact check, when you dig down on this, you find that the NBA suspended the remainder of the 2020 season on March 11th. I would say that's right on time. Does that mean the NBA are being guided by God? Does that make the NBA God's faithful and discreet slave? The Premier League also took action on March 11th when the pandemic was declared, deciding that all matches in England would be played without spectators. In fact, not just the Premier League, but other leagues as well, lower leagues. They had spectators cancelled for all remaining matches that season on March 11th. Does that make the Premier League or FA somehow divinely guided, somehow God's faithful slave, because they acted right away? I'm sorry, the facts just don't square up with what he's saying. What we're seeing, and again, it's great that they took the action that they took, but it wasn't fast. It was sort of average at best, how quickly they shut things down. What we're seeing is exactly what we would expect to see from a man-made organization, where there's a bit of indecision and where they don't really know what to do and they're waiting to see how things play out. That's what we're seeing. There's nothing extraordinary whatsoever, either in the example that's given about the pandemic or in the earlier example about World War II, much less that nonsense about 1958 Yankee Stadium Convention. Where is the evidence, Mark Sanderson, that any of these decisions or any of these events or any of these Watchtower magazines had divine guidance behind them?
And during the pandemic, we've had to change our methods, haven't we? We've had to receive direction about how to carry out our preaching work and how to carry out our congregation meetings. But throughout this period, we have received powerful, powerful evidence that Jehovah has given this direction to us at the proper time. Now, let me just give you a couple of examples. During the 2021 service year, at least 22 branches have reported an all-time peak in the number of publishers. Can you imagine? During the pandemic. For example, the Korea branch has reported a new peak in publishers every month during the 2021 service year. Isn't that amazing? During a pandemic. And with so many wonderful things happening in the field, I'm sure that you're all wondering about our worldwide memorial attendance for 2021. Well, by the undeserved kindness of our amazing God, Jehovah, we have reached an all-time peak, crossing the 21 million mark. Would you like to know the exact figure? Well, keep on the watch. It'll be announced today at the proper time. Well, today in our program, we are going to have a wonderful buffet of rich spiritual food of many varieties and types. And by the end of the program, I'm sure that you'll agree that it was just what we needed at this moment in time?
I think we'll reserve judgment for now, Mark Sanderson, if you don't mind, based on what we've seen already. Wow, he's really toying with the audience there, isn't he? Again, relishing this role as chairman of the 2021 annual meeting, teasing the figure for the memorial attendance, which apparently is all anyone can think about. I can actually think of a different figure I'd be more interested in, which is the percentage growth for 2021. And actually, I think the fact that he's not talking about that tells us a great deal. I think we can confidently say at this point, bear in mind this is October 2nd, 2021, a month after the 2021 service year ended. And bear in mind he's already giving us one of the figures from the 2021 grand totals. I think we can confidently say that they haven't had growth again. Because let's remember, the figures for 2020 were not good in terms of the actual growth of the organization. You can talk about memorial attendance all you like. You know, you can talk about branches having peak numbers. And by the way, 22 branches reporting an all-time peak. There are 87 branches. If you're going to say that 22 out of 87 had an all-time peak, shouldn't you also be telling us which of those 87 branches went into decline? Are you not blatantly cherry-picking when you do things this way? But yeah, the 2020 figures, it was a 0.6% decrease, the first of its kind in 42 years, as I mentioned repeatedly on this channel. This is an organization in decline, or was as of a year ago, and I think we're in for another one. Because if they had had an increase, despite it being a pandemic, and you'll notice the enthusiasm with which he cited the fact that these figures were in a pandemic.
During the 2021 service year, at least 22 branches have reported an all-time peak in the number of publishers. Can you imagine? During the pandemic.
So clearly he's excited about these figures in the context of the pandemic. He's essentially saying, our organization is being supported and guided and backed by God because look at what we've achieved despite there being a pandemic. And the two figures he's going for are the ones no one is really bothered about. In other words, the number of branches with all-time peaks and the memorial attendance. The memorial attendance is frankly irrelevant. We're talking about an event that many people attend just to keep their family happy. And I can imagine if I were a PMO JW, I would, quite frankly, bite the bullet. I would sit through that event just to keep my family off my back. I could imagine being in that mindset. This is an organization where people will feel coerced, will have felt coerced to go to that event, especially considering the fact that you didn't have to go in person. All you needed to do is log on to a Zoom call. So of course they were going to get a record attendance. I can't see how anyone was genuinely waiting with bated breath for that particular figure to be read out. The figure we want to know, the figure we're all waiting for, is the average publisher's figure. Because for 2019, it was 8,471,008. For 2020, it fell to 8,424,185, a drop of 46,823 Jehovah's Witnesses. And the fact that he isn't giving us the figure this time on October 2nd, 2021, tells me that we're in for another decline. Because if it had been a favorable number, you can bet he would have led with that.
How thrilled we were at last year's annual meeting to receive a new publication, Enjoy Life Forever, an interactive Bible course. Already, many publishers are having success in conducting progressive studies using this new tool. As you listen to experiences from around the world, note the evidence of Jehovah's blessing.
When they made the announcement of the new publication, for me, it was just pure excitement.
Actually, I was so overjoyed that I kept going to the website around the time of the release, and at times I would even refresh my browser a few times a day to see when it was out.
Having all the teaching methods right in our hands, what more can we ask for?
We're so excited that during this pandemic, Jehovah has given us something to energize our ministry.
When you heard that we would be using a new method for conducting studies,
Whoa, hold on there, Joel Dellinger. I'm not sure we've heard anything approaching what you promised us we would hear. So this is a little segment that's being shown at the 2021 annual meeting. Joel Dellinger, who I like to call Mini-Let, because he does seem to almost mimic Stephen Lett's stage style of speech. Mini-Let, or Joel Dellinger, is here presenting a segment all about the Enjoy Life Forever book, which was released at last year's annual meeting. They are recycling good news from a previous event as though it's still somehow new. It isn't. And in doing so, I'm sure we all heard Joel Dellinger say the following.
as you listen to experiences from around the world, note the evidence of Jehovah's blessing.
Where was the evidence of Jehovah's blessing? What you've done there, Joel Dellinger, is you've promised evidence of Jehovah's blessing and just given us a series of clips of appreciative Jehovah's Witnesses. We've seen evidence of appreciation. We've seen evidence of enthusiasm, of excitement about this book. That's completely different from evidence of Jehovah's blessing on this particular publication. How did they not pick up on this during production? I'm sorry, this is just a basic problem with the script. You would think when they're editing this, someone would have the guts to say, this bit doesn't really work because we're promising evidence and we're not giving anything that even amounts to evidence. We're just showing appreciation. Where is the direction here? Where is any kind of common sense when it comes to making sure that segments are put together well and flow well and are coherent? This was an incoherent introduction. It promised something and then immediately failed to deliver.
We were studying the first lesson with an 83-year-old lady when we came across Matthew chapter 7, verse 7. She read it in her own Bible, and at first, she didn't quite understand it. Then we pondered over the verse together with a question, and then all of a sudden she asked, "Oh, does this verse mean that I should dig for the answers in the Bible myself, instead of asking a priest?" It was quite a special moment.
The new book, Enjoy Life Forever, shows clearly that the faithful and discreet slave has been, is, and will continue to give exactly what we need at exactly the right time.
This publication has the potential to help many more honest-hearted ones come to know and love our wonderful Father, Jehovah. May He bless you and your Bible students as you put to use this new tool.
In total, this segment was 9 minutes long, and as you can see, I have spared you the vast majority of it. It was every bit as cheesy as that conclusion suggests. I couldn't help but chuckle, though, when we reached the part where Vera in Finland. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce her surname. I will mispronounce it. But Vera in Finland recounts this story of conducting a Bible study and her student saying,
And then all of a sudden she asked, "Oh, does this verse mean that I should dig for the answers in the Bible myself instead of asking a priest?" It was quite a special moment.
it's a real shame that Vera can't see the glaring irony here. We're talking about an organization strewn with teachings and policies that are entirely unbiblical. If Tibor is gracious, a thumbnail will emerge pointing you to a video with 10 examples of unbiblical teachings that Jehovah's Witnesses promote in their Bible studies. And here is a woman saying, oh, does this mean that I can rely solely on the Bible? I can just read my Bible and the Bible alone will tell me everything I need to know. She's saying this in the context of a formulated study, an organized study regimen, where she is literally studying a book that's telling her what the Bible says and explaining to her various teachings that she will have to accept if she wants to successfully complete her interactive study course. I'm sorry, I'm not buying it. If you're looking for a group of people that bases everything on the Bible and doesn't suggest that some overarching leadership, some overarching faithful slave has the last word on what the Bible means and how it should be interpreted, I'm sorry, you're looking in the wrong place by studying with Jehovah's Witnesses.
Well, for the past several years, a unique feature of our annual meeting program has been a new so-called epic edition of the Become Jehovah's Friend series. We call it an epic because it's longer than the usual episodes. We're now pleased to present Become Jehovah's Friend, Does God Answer Prayers?
Hey, Sophia, we know you're in there. Please, Jehovah, make it stop. What a loser. Let's go.
All right, class. Today we're going to discuss... Sophia, you're late.
I'm sorry. I was...
Never mind. We'll talk about this later. Okay. That's enough. Sophia, take your seat. Today, we're going to discuss the difference between division and long division. Okay, class, here are the results from yesterday's test. Good work, Sophia.
Hey, Angela, what'd you get? I don't care. Whoa, D+? Well, at least there's a plus. Whatever. What are you looking at? Sophia. Oops, I didn't see you there. It's like you're invisible. Oh, what's this? No! See you tomorrow. Are you okay? Let me help. Sometimes they pick on me too.
We're watching the latest installment in the Caleb and Sophia Become Jehovah's Friend saga. This is lesson 43. Does Jehovah answer prayers? And we can see that Sophia is in quite a predicament. We can understand why she might perhaps be tempted to try prayer. She is being bullied at school. And wow, is it just me, or is this not a really dark, triggering episode? And bear in mind, this is supposed to be appealing to children. This is supposed to be presenting the Jehovah's Witness message in a way that's fun and entertaining for young minds. And I was watching this thinking, I'm really, really glad that Jessica and Julia don't have to watch this. Quite apart from the indoctrinating element, quite apart from the fact that it's, you know, programming their young minds with Jehovah's Witness dogma, apart from all that, it's just not a pleasant experience to see a cartoon portray childhood in this way, in this really dark, sinister way. So it was quite unnerving for me, and I definitely relate to the plot so far, because almost anyone, I would say, who's been raised as a Jehovah's Witness and has gone through school, bear in mind some Jehovah's Witness children get pulled and homeschooled. If you've been through school as a Jehovah's Witness, it's almost a certainty that at some point you have experienced bullying. And for me, the bullying, mostly on account of my religion, mostly on account of the fact that I was a Jehovah's Witness, was all the time. And I can remember being reduced to tears and crying into my pillow at the thought of having to go through it all again the next day. I can remember my parents being in despair that they were having to send both me and my sister to school to go through this onslaught of bullying. And it wasn't so much that I was being picked on just for being a Jehovah's Witness. It was, I would say, more about what my beliefs as a Jehovah's Witness required me to do that made me stand out in a way that would attract bullying. Not that there's ever any justification for bullying, but let's just be realistic. There are ways to navigate through high school, through the high school experience, without drawing undue attention to yourself, without making it easy for people to come up with reasons to bully you. And when you're a Jehovah's Witness, you are essentially told that your school is your territory, and it is your duty to go to school, not just to learn, not just to receive an education, but to preach, to recruit others into your religion, to recruit your classmates, and if possible, your teacher, into your faith. So I was going to school with that in mind, preaching to my classmates. I can remember placing literature with people. And that sort of stuff's going to draw attention. You're going to have a massive target on your back if people know you to be the sort of person who's going to try and push your religious beliefs on others. In other words, you're living right up to the stereotype of Jehovah's Witnesses that these kids' parents already have. So the kids are going to their parents and they're saying, there's this kid at school called Lloyd who's a Jehovah's Witness, and the parents are going, oh, those are the people that come and bother you on a Saturday morning and preach to you. And the kid's saying, actually, funny you should say that. That's exactly what Lloyd's doing. Lloyd is preaching to people. Lloyd is trying to drag people into the religion. So bullying, I mean, I'd be interested to know what you viewers have to say who've been through this. For me personally, it was a huge part of my childhood and a really painful part of my childhood, which I'm sure leaves kind of psychological scars. I mean, nowhere on the scale that something like child abuse would leave, but nevertheless, it's something that I feel is quite a traumatizing experience for a child to go through. And here I'm watching it portrayed, and it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it? Because the organization surely knows that nearly all Jehovah's Witness kids will relate to this. They're just not admitting that it's mostly because of what Jehovah's Witness kids are required to do at school.
It was amazing. And then Miss Wilson said that I could hold the bunny. But I had to be very gentle.
Really?
I named him Fred. But I didn't get to hold him for very long. I'm pretty much a bunny expert now.
Oh. Is everything all right, honey?
See you tomorrow. I'm fine.
Okay, let's talk about something very important. Prayer. Caleb, what are some things that you can pray for?
Well, I can pray for things that make me happy. Like a helicopter. Or a mountain of ice cream. Without the bellyache. And Fred.
I see. But tell me, when we pray before bedtime, what do we pray for?
We thank Jehovah for the good things he made, like animals, the stars, and the ocean. And God's kingdom. And to help our brothers and sisters.
That's right. You can pray for your brothers and sisters. And remember, they are praying for you too. We know that when we pray for the right things, Jehovah hears us.
Then why doesn't he answer my prayers?
Oh, what's wrong, Sophia? You can tell us.
There's a girl at school. She's so mean to me.
Oh, no. Oh, honey, it's okay.
I prayed for it to stop, but nothing's happened. Is Jehovah mad at me?
No, my dear. Jehovah isn't mad at you.
Maybe Jehovah can't see me.
No.
I don't know what's more disturbing at this point, the bullying or the lying to children. That's what we're seeing here. It's bad enough that Sophia has to think about bullying and how to get through that problem. But layer on this child indoctrination, we're here seeing a family worship session, a very poorly lit family worship session, I might add. Why are all the lights out? Or why is there so little lighting? Is there like a power cut? I mean, why are they literally doing an exercise that involves reading in near total darkness? I really don't understand. It's not just a dark cartoon, it's a literally dark cartoon. So what's going on there? I have no idea. But anyway, they're having a family worship session in a power cut, and a family worship session is essentially a child indoctrination session. And we can see that Sophia is here really struggling to reconcile her religious beliefs, or the religious beliefs that she is required to have, with her lived experience. Because she's being told that as a Jehovah's Witness or as a servant of Jehovah, she can enjoy some degree of protection. Jehovah's going to look out for her. Jehovah's going to care for her. And because she's going to school and being bullied, and Jehovah isn't listening to her prayers, or she's praying for this to stop and it's not stopping, she feels invisible. So what's happening here is her indoctrination is actually exacerbating an existing problem. But that's clearly not where this story is intended to go. It's not that Sophia had a problem with praying, it's that she wasn't adjusting her expectations. She was expecting the wrong things. And I would argue this is going to be a problem not just for children, but for anyone who subscribes to Jehovah's Witness beliefs, because what do we routinely see in the JW Broadcasting propaganda? Indeed, we're going to see examples of it in this annual meeting. We routinely see the suggestion that God is intervening literally in the here and now to the physical benefit of those who worship him. So in this very annual meeting, we're going to hear them referring to Jehovah's hand and talk about how some actual physical thing is physical proof that God is directly intervening in the here and now to assist his servants. So it's actually perfectly reasonable in that context that Sophia should expect the bullying to stop. Because how can it be that God is allowing the organization to be granted certain building permits or to meet certain building deadlines or whatever other mundane things are being attributed to God's intervention? How is God intervening there, but he can't be bothered to step in and stop Angela from bullying Sophia?
There is someone in the Bible who felt the same way you do. Her name was Hannah. Hannah loved Jehovah very much.
Hey, wait for me!
But someone named Penina was very mean to her.
It's so nice to see the children play, isn't it?
She had a bully too?
Yes.
We're ready to eat. Here's your portion, Hannah. And Penina, here's yours.
She was very jealous of Hannah.
I'll get some water.
You think you're so special, Hannah? Then why hasn't Jehovah given you any children?
Are you okay, Hannah? Why are you so sad?
Others could not understand why Hannah was so upset, because the pain was in her heart. So she talked to the one who would understand.
Oh, Jehovah, please see me. Remember me and do not forget me. Please give me a child. If you do, I will give him to you all his life to serve you.
What are you doing? Why are you drunk?
I'm not drunk. I'm under great stress.
Oh.
I've been praying for Jehovah to help me.
Go in peace, and may Jehovah give you what you've asked for.
What on earth does this have to do with Sophia's situation? We're talking about bullying at school and prayer being the answer. And the solution apparently is to consider the story of a Bible character who beseeched God to have children because barrenness was considered a curse in the Hebrew culture that was basically dictated by God. And the solution was that Hannah prayed and was blessed with a child. God intervened and, through a miracle, allowed Hannah to have a child, because otherwise she would be viewed as cursed, again, due to the divinely mandated culture that she was in. And I actually touched on this in a previous sushi. If Tibor is gracious, a thumbnail will appear. Which Bible culture deemed barrenness a curse? It seems this is a recurring theme now in JW propaganda, them effectively taunting women on this subject. Because this is something where I'm sure many women feel resentment over the fact that they went without children while they were Jehovah's Witnesses, feeling that that was the thing to do because Armageddon was imminent and they needed to throw everything into serving Jehovah. So if they did everything they could in the here and now to serve the organization, they would be rewarded with as many children as they want in the paradise, when there would be all the time in the world to grow a family. I think that's been the experience not of every woman, but certainly of many women. And for them to be, I say them, for the organization to be repeatedly bringing up this whole issue of barrenness feels incredibly tone deaf. And just to reiterate, this whole idea of barrenness being somehow a curse comes from the Bible. If we go to Genesis 30 verses 1 and 2, I quote this verse in the sushi that I've just referred to. When Rachel saw that she had borne no children to Jacob, she became jealous of her sister and began to say to Jacob, "Give me children or else I will die." At this, Jacob's anger flared up against Rachel, and he said, "Am I in the place of God who has prevented you from having children?" So the idea was in the Bible that if you were barren, if you were infertile, or if you didn't have children, it was God who was preventing you from having children. That's the idea that we repeatedly see represented in the Bible. So when we're talking about this whole story of Peninnah taunting Hannah, what Peninnah is actually doing is invoking verses like this. Peninnah is just parroting the wisdom that we find in the Bible in relation to childbearing, and this idea that if you're being blessed by God, you're going to have lots of children. But that aside, again, what's the relevance here to Sophia's specific situation where she's struggling with bullying? If we apply this lesson to Sophia's situation, then Sophia will say a prayer and all bullies around her will magically disappear, or she will be able to go through the rest of her school without having any bullies or any problems with bullying. Because in this Bible verse, Hannah needed a child. She made a deal, she cut a deal with God, and God gave her a child. God gave her everything that she wanted. Well, is Sophia going to get everything that she wants if she prays to God and asks God to stop the bullying?
Do you know why Hannah felt better, even though her prayer wasn't answered yet?
Why?
Because Hannah knew Jehovah heard her prayer.
When Jehovah listens to your prayers, he really listens. And he knows just what we need, even better than we do.
But how does he answer them?
In lots of different ways. Sometimes we just have to wait and see.
Because he's busy?
No, because it can be hard for us to see the answer. Let's talk about what you can pray for.
And what you can do tomorrow at school to work along with those prayers.
I know that Angela and the other girls are going to be mean to me. But please help me to be like Hannah tomorrow. Help me to be strong like her. And then she went to the tabernacle and Eli was there. He was the high priest. Oh no, it's them, run! Look who it is. What do you want, Angela?
Oh, I was just wondering if you had a pen I could borrow.
Again, we're watching the latest installment in the Caleb and Sophia Become Jehovah's Friend saga. This is lesson 43. Does Jehovah answer prayers? It's an epic Caleb and Sophia cartoon, epic meaning longer than normal, that's been unveiled at the 2021 annual meeting. The organisation is very proud of, well, the whole Caleb and Sophia series, it seems, but especially proud of these longer cartoons because they have more opportunity, I guess, to push their dogma on children. And let's make no mistake, that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing children being indoctrinated by means of cartoons. I think that's a fairly uncontroversial thing to say. But when you actually see the depiction of a family worship session, namely that part where the mother and father are reasoning with Sophia, who is distraught over her bullying situation, they're bringing up a Bible verse that, again, bears no real relation to her specific situation, her specific problem of bullying. And having gone through that whole story of Hannah and Peninnah and Hannah's barrenness and Hannah beseeching God for a child, they then start to speak more on Sophia's level about the nature of prayer, and that's where we see the real, well, frankly, the lies that parents are forced to tell children.
When Jehovah listens to your prayers, he really listens. And he knows just what we need, even better than we do.
But how does he answer them?
In lots of different ways. Sometimes we just have to wait and see.
I'm sorry, that is total BS. What we're seeing here, and this is supposedly how Jehovah's Witness parents should be speaking to their children. What we're seeing here is a mother lying to her daughter and telling her daughter something that's not true or can't be proven just to hopefully make her daughter feel better. I'm so glad I don't have to do that as a father. I'm so glad I can just be, well, truthful and honest when I'm addressing difficult subjects with my children. We haven't had to deal with bullying yet. Hopefully we won't have to. We have had to deal, though, with some difficult topics. Oh, I don't like the idea of dying. Oh, what will I do when you die, Daddy, or you die, Mummy? I don't want you to die. We've had those sorts of conversations. And sometimes there are no easy answers when you're parenting. But I'd rather give complicated answers or answers that require a little bit of thought that are challenging to give in a child's language, I'd rather do that legwork now than have to lie to my child. And what Sophia's mother was doing there was lying. When Jehovah listens to your prayers, he really listens. Oh yeah. Couldn't anyone say that? Oh, I'm really listening to you. You carry on talking. I'm totally listening. I'm mentally registering every single word you say. I'm not going to ever prove it, but believe me, I'm listening. And he knows just what we need even better than we do. Again, unfalsifiable statement. God's real. He's listening to every word you say when you pray. And he knows what you need better than you do. Another thing I was told as a child when I was hearing this sort of BS from my parents was, God knows you better than you know yourself. I was like, wow, how is that? I feel like I know myself pretty well. And yet you're telling me that God knows me better than I know myself. Stuff like that. It's just word games, isn't it? It's just a vacuous statement that means nothing and is purely intended to push dogma and assert wish thinking as like a sticking plaster, as like a band-aid, just to tide you over, just to get you through. It's not a long-term fix. It's just a lazy stopgap, isn't it? But how does he answer them? In lots of different ways. Sometimes we just have to wait and see. Isn't that the organization's answer when it comes to Armageddon? Well, sometimes we just have to wait and see. I know we keep saying that Armageddon is just around the corner. I know we've been saying that now for literally over 100 years. I know we've been saying it's imminent and it's going to happen any moment. And we're living at the end of the end, the final part of the final part of the last days of the last days. We've been using that very language now for over 100 years. But trust me, it'll all work out fine. You just wait and see. I feel like Sophia's mother is essentially playing the role of the organization at this point, because that's exactly the sort of BS that the organization feeds the rank and file. But I feel there's also an irony in this whole story of bullying, because Sophia is suffering with bullying as a Jehovah's Witness child, and I've spoken about how common that is, at least in my lived experience. If you're a Jehovah's Witness child, you're going to experience bullying at school, and we saw just in that last clip a clear indication of why that might happen. She's preaching straight away after her family worship, and she's recounting this story of Hannah and Peninnah to her classmate. And she's doing that not because it genuinely interests her. She's doing it because it's her duty as a child of Jehovah's Witness parents. Children are expected to go to school and preach. So no surprises that she's going to be bullied, as I've already said. But it's kind of ironic, given what we saw in lesson 22, One Man, One Woman, in which Sophia encountered a classmate who had two mummies, and this resulted in her receiving this advice from her mother.
But I want everyone to get to paradise.
So does Jehovah. And you know what? People can change. That's why we share his message. So, what can you say to Carrie?
Well, I could tell her about the paradise. I could tell her about the animals and the resurrection.
That's awesome. Let's practice.
It may be a bit of a stretch to call it bullying, but I would at the very least call it extremely inappropriate for Sophia to be singling out a classmate on the basis that her parents are in a same-sex relationship, and on that basis singling out her classmate for proselytizing, for pushing her religious beliefs that are homophobic and which say that if you are gay, if you are lesbian, if you are bisexual, you are an abomination and you need to get rid of that lifestyle lest you be destroyed at Armageddon. So you need to, rather than just kind of let people do what they need to do, you need to single out a classmate who has parents in a same-sex relationship as being the focus of your evangelizing efforts. And now Sophia is herself on the receiving end of inappropriate behavior by a fellow classmate. I can't help but note the irony here.
What do I do?
Jehovah heard her prayer.
Jehovah, it's me, Caleb. Please help Sophia.
And please, help Sophia be strong at school today.
Watch over the children in our congregation, like Caleb and Sophia.
Please watch over our children. Help our children. Make you proud, Jehovah.
Please, Jehovah, give our children the strength they need to face pressure.
Jehovah, please, I need your help.
We ask you this prayer in Jesus' name.
Amen. Amen.
Amen. What? Are you gonna cry? Stop, Angela. You're being mean. And if you keep being mean, I'm going to tell. No, you won't. Yes, I will. You can't tell me what to do. Let's go, Zoe. That's my sister. You're so brave. How did you do that? I prayed for courage, and Jehovah helped me. Hannah gave birth to a son and named him Samuel, because, as she said,
It is from Jehovah that I have asked him. There is no one holy like Jehovah. There is no one but you.
Thank you, Jehovah.
Well, that was truly spiritual food at the proper time. And while it will touch the hearts of all of our young ones, I think that message is something we all need to hear and take to heart at this time.
Well, I've certainly heard it, Mark Sanderson. I'm not sure I need to hear it. There are many things I would prefer to hear. But wow, yes, thus concludes the latest Caleb and Sophia cartoon on the subject of prayer. And there we see Jehovah swooping to the rescue, because how else could Sophia have stood up to a bully? Apparently, this is something you can only do with divine backing. Who knew? You know, all of the millions or billions of children that are going to school and who are suffering with bullying, if only they were Jehovah's Witnesses, if only they had a direct line to the Almighty and we saw a creepy visualization of what that looks like. If only they were Jehovah's Witnesses, they would have this secret cure for bullying, which is to say a prayer and then you'll be able to stand up to a bully. Oh, how did you do that, Sophia? Jehovah answered my prayer. You just stood up to a bully. Anyone can do that from any religion. It actually reminded me of when I was younger. My best friend in the congregation, who I've since been in touch with a little bit because he's no longer a Jehovah's Witness either. A bit of a long story there, and I don't think he would appreciate me going into it. But I will tell you this. I can remember him attending school and also being bullied. And I can remember an anecdote from his bullying that was included in a comment at the Kingdom Hall so that the whole congregation came to hear of it. He was being bullied, and he closed his eyes and said a prayer to Jehovah and said amen, and when he opened his eyes, the bullies were gone. So you can imagine this story was told in our congregation, and everyone was concluding, well, obviously, this is because Jehovah answered this, I'm not going to say his name, this young boy's prayer, and manipulated the bullies so that they would, leave the vicinity and go and do something else. Looking back with critical thinking, I think I know what happened. I think that the bullies no longer found it entertaining once he closed his eyes and became motionless. They probably were just a bit weirded out by it. Because let's face it, bullies just want entertainment, and their entertainment is other people's misery. And if it doesn't look like they're going to be able to cause someone to be miserable because they've just shut down and closed their eyes, you could sort of understand why they would think, oh, let's go do something else. This is boring, That explanation certainly makes more sense than God swooping in and altering their brain chemistry to make them go and do something else. A God who sat arms folded through the Holocaust and wouldn't do anything about that situation. But he sees a child being bullied, in this instance in the Caleb and Sophia cartoon, action stations, quick, a child is in distress and I have just the solution. I'm going to make this child have the bravery to stand up to a bully, something this child would be unable to do if she hadn't asked me for this power. It's just, the whole thing unravels, doesn't it, when you subject it to the mildest scrutiny. As for that weird visualization about the prayers drifting up, so now we know, this is new light, I guess. Now we know that when prayers are said, they're like flammable bubbles of gas. Maybe Tibor can overlay if he's gracious. Flammable bubbles of gas are rising up, I guess like farts. Farts rising through the universe to to God on his celestial throne. I never thought of prayers working that way. But wow, isn't God ignoring a whole lot of prayers when you think about it? And, let's be serious for a moment. In the context of children, and in the context of children needing help, and people, Jehovah's Witness elders and governing body helpers, I noticed Ralph Walls there, given the cartoon treatment, in the context of prayers being offered for the welfare of children and the protection and safety of children, I'm not sure this is quite the religion to be talking about prayers in this context, based on what we know about child safeguarding, based on what we know about the rampant problems that this organization has in relation to child abuse, due to the written policies that are enacted and proliferated by the leadership.
Incredible. That's the only way to describe it. The word had gone out that the Jews who had been captives in Babylon were free to leave and to return to their homeland, Israel. Now, you all know why that was incredible, because Babylon never released its captives. But Babylon had been overthrown, and the new administration had said that the Jews were free to go. Only Jehovah could have been responsible for that. So, every family head had a decision to make: to leave Babylon or to stay behind. Now, you might say, there was no decision to make at all. That's not a hard decision. But wait, hold it. Most of the Jews had been born in Babylon, and most of their parents had been born in Babylon. It was the only home they knew. Their roots were there. And according to certain records, some of them had got prosperous. Some of them had got wealthy. There are records of Jews buying and selling precious gems and other luxury items. So, one says, I can't leave Babylon. My business partner is a Babylonian, and the business is doing really well, and there'd be no market for the products we sell in Israel. Another would say, my son married a Babylonian woman, and they just had a baby, our first grandchild. He's so cute, I can't leave now. So on the one hand, you have these material benefits from remaining in Babylon. But on the other hand, the ability of the Jews to worship Jehovah freely was severely limited. So you had material advantages to staying, but the spiritual blessings that awaited those who chose to leave were going to be immense. And for spiritually minded Jews, it was no contest.
For spiritually minded Jews, it was no contest. Wow, what an interesting talk we're watching. This is David Splain, governing body member. He's taking us through a talk titled The Way of Holiness. It seems David Splain just can't get enough of this particular element of Bible history or the Bible narrative, namely the idea of Jews being captive in Babylon, subsequently returning, even though it was apparently in Babylon where they got greedy and learned the art of buying and selling.
We have the example of the Jews who were returning from Babylon to Jerusalem. Now, captivity in Babylon wasn't as harsh as slavery in Egypt. Jews in Babylon could build a house, run a business, plant a vineyard, get comfortable in life. Some of them even got rich. Scholars believe that it was in Babylon that the Jews learned about the art of buying and selling, trade and commerce.
That was David Splain speaking a year previously at the Always Rejoice convention, perpetuating this stereotype of Jewish people as being preoccupied with trade, commerce, and getting rich. How dare Jewish people get rich? How unthinkable. Before they were in Babylon, they didn't know anything about being rich. They didn't know anything about buying and selling. They'd look at money with this bemused expression on their face, thinking, what is this? What am I supposed to do with this money? They had no clue about running a business or keeping their finances in order. Only when they went to Babylon did they start to succumb to the snare of riches and become wealthy. I've said it before and I'll say it again. What David Splain said, certainly at the Always Rejoice convention, was perpetuating an anti-Semitic trope of the Jewish people. And I find it interesting that he seems to be so obsessed, again, with this particular aspect of the Bible narrative. This whole idea of the Jews going into captivity in Babylon and somehow becoming corrupted while they were in Babylon, and then having to return but deal with these Babylonish traits that they'd picked up. So in this particular talk, again titled The Way of Holiness, he's appealing to a verse in Isaiah that describes a highway of holiness. And just so we don't have to watch the whole thing, let me just describe roughly his argument, or roughly what he's saying here. Allow me to paraphrase. this part of the talk, he's establishing this idea of people going ahead and creating the path for others to follow, as they did when the Jews were returning from exile. It wasn't as though Isaiah's highway of holiness was a literal highway, was like some kind of asphalt dual lane system with like infrastructure and service stops and that kind of thing. It wasn't a literal highway. As he says in his talk, it was probably a case, and we have no historical sources cited, I should add, but what David Splain's saying is probably what happened is the first few Jews who returned to the Promised Land would maybe clear away a few obstacles on the path and make it a bit easier for those who would follow, and so on, so that progressively the way of holiness, the way for Jews to return to the Promised Land from Babylon, got a little bit easier for each group that would make that journey. That's the gist of his talk, and he's applying this model predictably to the history of Jehovah's Witnesses. But in so doing, as we're going to see, he's going to stoop to no small amount of historical revisionism and deception. He's going to try hijacking figures from history who weren't Jehovah's Witnesses and make out like they were Jehovah's Witnesses. And we've also seen here him drop clues as to how the governing body feels about the family arrangement. Because what did David Splain say in relation to material considerations versus spiritual considerations for Jews in exile?
Another would say, my son married a Babylonian woman, and they just had a baby, our first grandchild. He's so cute, I can't leave now. So on the one hand, you have these material benefits from remaining in Babylon.
Apparently, having a family is a material benefit. And if you're spiritual enough, you won't let family come in the way of spiritual things, of spiritual pursuits. That's the message I take from this. He's literally pointing to the example of a child being born to grandparents, and the grandparents wanting to stay with their new grandchild. And he's scorning that decision, this hypothetical decision, by saying, oh, the baby's cute, that's why we're staying. As though that's why people love children. As though that's the reason why a grandparent would want to be in the life of their grandchild. Oh, it's just because he's cute. Apparently that's how shallow and fickle and stupid people who care for their families are. I love the fact that the governing body are so insistent on putting themselves front center, not just on the JW broadcasting, but also at the conventions and at the annual meetings. They cannot get enough of themselves. They love the sound of their own voice. And I love the fact that they're given this opportunity to just mouth off with a microphone in front of them, because that's when we hear these little things dropped, these little hints dropped along their highway of stupidity that help us build a picture of how their minds work. And when I hear David Splain talk, I hear someone who is very small-minded, in my view, quite likely a very bigoted person, and certainly someone who sneers on the notion of family and sneers on the notion of, for example, grandparents wanting to stick around for their grandchildren.
Today, not tens of thousands, but millions of men, women, and children are responding to the command, the urgent command, get out of her. Get out of Babylon the Great. And the situation is different from the situation of the Jews in ancient times, because they had a choice. They could remain in Babylon and still serve Jehovah. But people today have no choice. They must leave Babylon the Great. Their life depends on it.
This is exactly what I was talking about. Please, let's hear as much as possible from these men. You know, if I could record every single word that comes out of the mouth of David Splain, if I could have like a full transcript available and be able to summon up the recordings of every word that is uttered from the mouth of David Splain, Anthony Morris, Stephen Lett, I would love to have it. I want these individuals, these charlatans, these con artists, to have as much exposure as possible, and I love the fact that they're indulging me, at least insofar as these annual meetings, the JW broadcasting. Let's hear your stupidity, David Splain, and let's hear you drop hints at how controlling this religion really is. We've heard him there confess that being a Jehovah's Witness is not a choice.
But people today have no choice. They must leave Babylon the Great. Their life depends on it.
People today have no choice. No choice. They must leave Babylon. They must leave Babylon the Great. Any religion that's different from ours, they must leave. They must turn their backs on it. Their life depends on it. Well, there you go. Need I say more? At this point, I can just play his words. I don't need to exaggerate, do I? I don't need to lie about what he's just said. I don't need to mischaracterize it in any way, shape, or form. It's bad enough as it is. If you're watching this as someone who doesn't know anything about Jehovah's Witnesses, you're just curious, well, there you go. It's a doomsday cult. They feel as though people have no choice but to become Jehovah's Witnesses if they want to save their lives, if they want to keep living. They'd better become Jehovah's Witnesses. They'd better reject any other form of religion. Their life depends on it.
It is easier to travel the highway of holiness today because of the spiritual sight work that was started hundreds of years ago, long before Babylon the Great fell, long before the road was open for travelers. Now picture this. It's the 16th century. With shovel in hand, you are about to start sight work on the way of holiness. There's a mountain ahead of you, a mountain of ignorance. And you realize that if you're going to start to level that mountain, the first thing you're going to have to do is get the Bible into the hands of the people. For years, the Bible was only in Latin, and mostly educated people could read it. And even some of the clergy only knew enough Latin to conduct church services, but otherwise they couldn't understand it. Well, if you've been to our beautiful museum, some of you have taken a tour recently, you know that translators in many countries risk their freedom and even their lives to put the Bible into the language of the common people. And then printers produced those translations. And some of them used an assumed name because if they got caught printing a Bible, they could be arrested and even worse. So the mountain had to be leveled a shovelful at a time, one Bible at a time to reduce that mountain on the way of holiness. To get the Bible into the hands of the people, William Tyndale arranged to have thousands of copies of his translation smuggled into England in bales of cotton and other goods. This was dangerous. Tyndale's translation was banned in England, and if you merely possessed a copy of the Bible, that could bring you a stint in the Tower of London, or worse. But despite desperate attempts to stop work on the way of holiness, more copies of Tyndale's Bible were printed than the clergy could ever destroy. By the way, you'll be interested in a comment that Tyndall made in his comments on the book of Genesis, 1530 translation of the book of Genesis. He wrote, "Jehovah is God's name. Neither is any creature so called. As oft as thou seest Lord in capital letters, it is in Hebrew, Jehovah." Early on, the name Jehovah was given some recognition.
We're watching David Splain's talk at the 2021 annual meeting, his title, The Way of Holiness. And this is the part for me where his talk starts to get really disingenuous and quite inappropriate. What he's doing is he is appropriating characters from history and suggesting that they were somehow early Jehovah's Witnesses. That's roughly what he's doing here. As I mentioned earlier, all of this is based on a verse in Isaiah that describes a way of holiness, which David Splain has explained to be the road, the literal road from Babylon to the Promised Land, gradually getting easier as more Jews made that journey home. They would make it easier for those who would follow. He's using that as an analogy for Jehovah's Witnesses, and he's now pointing to figures from history who were not Jehovah's Witnesses. Let's be very clear on that. He's pointing to figures from history. He's name-dropping, cherry-picking favourable characters and suggesting, well, this William Tyndale, or Tyndall as he describes, this William Tyndale was effectively an early Jehovah's Witness. We're going to appropriate him into our whole movement. It's kind of a shady practice to be doing that with dead people, isn't it? I mean, imagine once you're dead, let's just imagine that I were to die and in the future, some cult were to spring up with certain ideas that could be construed as mirroring mine in some way. And they had all sorts of abusive practices. They were ruining families. They were covering up abuse. They were doing all of these various things. I'm trying to imagine how I would feel if in one of their talks or if in their literature, they justified their organization based on something that I'd said or based on some ideas that I've mentioned on my YouTube channel. And because I'm dead, hypothetically speaking, I wouldn't be in a position to say anything, would I? I wouldn't be in a position to object because I'm dead. So what he's doing is incredibly inappropriate if you think about it. It's kind of dishonoring the memory of William Tyndale to be suggesting that he was effectively an early Jehovah's Witness. And make no mistake, he wasn't. If he hadn't been executed, let's say he'd been teleported at the moment of his execution, just before he was killed. Let's say he'd been teleported to the year 2021 and he was with us now. And let's say he sat down for an interview and was asked to talk about his religious views. Would be challenging because he'd be speaking in Shakespearean English. But I think we'd understand that we'd get the gist of what he's saying. He'd be coming out with a whole bunch of views and ideas that are polar opposite to the Jehovah's Witness religion. And even in areas in which there is some kind of alignment, such as David Splain citing that thing about Jehovah, that doesn't mean that William Tyndale acknowledges the faithful slave. That doesn't mean that William Tyndale accepts that in 1919, Jesus invisibly chose Watchtower officials, Joseph Rutherford and his associates, to be faithful and discreet slave 1.0 an authority that's been inherited by David Splane and his associates. You have to believe that if you're not going to be an apostate, if you're going to be a Jehovah's Witness. And if William Tyndale doesn't believe that, which he doesn't or didn't, because he couldn't have, then he's not a Jehovah's Witness. And what happens to people who aren't Jehovah's Witnesses when Armageddon comes? They get destroyed. They get killed. If William Tyndale were alive today, he'd better accept David Splane's authority over him, or he'd be annihilated. So quite apart from speaking for the dead, it's incredibly inappropriate and disingenuous for David Splane to be name-dropping in this way, cherry-picking figures from history that suit his narrative. Incredibly disingenuous, and we're not done yet, because he's got some more examples for us.
About 1835, a Bible student by the name of Henry Grew wrote a pamphlet on the immortality of the soul. And in that pamphlet, Grew explained from the Bible that immortality is a reward for faithfulness. We're not born with it. Now, he published the tract anonymously because he knew there'd be trouble. And later on, there was trouble for Henry Grew. Well, he publishes a tract, but 2 years later, another Bible student, George Storrs, is riding in a train, and he looks down and he sees a tract there, and it's Henry Grew's tract on the immortality of the soul. He reads it, and he becomes convinced that man doesn't have an immortal soul. So what does he do? He picks up a shovel, and he starts working on the road, the way of holiness. In 1842, he gave a series of lectures on the intriguing theme, Are the Wicked Immortal? And he later published those lectures. Do you know how many copies were produced? 200,000 copies of that series of lectures. So that was decent road work on that way of holiness. Well, Storrs knew that he didn't have the whole truth on every subject. And in 1847, he made quite an interesting statement. It'd be interesting for us. He says, "We do well to remember that we have just emerged from the dark ages of the church." And notice this, it would not be strange if we should find some Babylonish garments still worn by us. Well, he was right. Babylon still had influence in those days. Well, we know that George Storrs had an influence on Charles Taze Russell. And what do we know about Brother Russell and his associates? They weren't the first to discover that the Trinity and the immortality of the soul are false doctrines, or even that Christ's presence would be invisible to the human eye. They benefited from the careful preparatory work that other road workers had done in the past. So, translators, printers, and Bible students were doing spiritual sight work. And we might say that Brother Russell and his associates put the final touches on that way of holiness.
He's doing it again, isn't he? He's hijacking, he's commandeering the memory of non-Jehovah's Witnesses who were around before Jehovah's Witnesses were even a thing, and he's suggesting that they were somehow early Jehovah's Witnesses. These men are dead. These men cannot speak for themselves. If they were here now, they'd probably be condemned by Jehovah's Witnesses, or at least it's likely that their views would not align with Jehovah's Witness views in some way, making them condemned at Armageddon. And yet their names are being invoked as somehow lending credibility to this vile David Splane character, who wants you to believe that the efforts of people like William Tyndale, Henry Grew, and George Storrs were all leading to him, were all leading to the governing body arrangement and their authority as being the channel of communication between God and mankind. It's so slimy and shady, isn't it? And what's fascinating is, quite apart from the fact that, again, these men were not Jehovah's Witnesses, it's interesting when you actually dig down and learn more about these characters. I found it interesting when David Splain says,
And what do we know about Brother Russell and his associates?
Yes, what do we know, David Splain? What do we know about Brother Russell and his associates? What are Jehovah's Witnesses allowed to know? Because let's face it, you tell them what they're allowed to know about Brother Russell. You tell them, you spoon feed them their history. You select what quotes from Brother Russell should be shown, and which of Brother Russell's words Jehovah's Witnesses are allowed to have access to. What publications of Brother Russell are Jehovah's Witnesses allowed to read for themselves on jw.org? Name one. It's so shady the way that the organization uses the history in this way and presents this whitewashed version. And in the case of Henry Grew and George Storrs, it's easy to unravel this whole narrative of them being early Jehovah's Witnesses. Interestingly, when you look up the Wikipedia page on Henry Grew, allow me to read a portion. Grew was invited to the World Anti-Slavery Convention beginning 12th of June 1840 in London. I'm going to skip a paragraph. Before and during the convention, there was fierce debate about the participation and seating of women delegates and attendees. Grew sided with the British organisers and spoke in favour of the men's right to exclude women, despite his daughter also being excluded. In 1854, a similar public debate took place when Grew and Mary attended the 5th Annual National Women's Rights Convention in Philadelphia. Grew debated with Lucretia Mott, during which he lauded the supremacy and authority of men. What a charming character. You know what, David Splain? You can have him. I don't agree with your logic that Henry Grew was a Jehovah's Witness, but if you really want a man like that to be a Jehovah's Witness, well, he's a prime candidate, isn't he? At least in terms of his misogyny and his view of women, he would fit right in, wouldn't he? As an elder or as a governing body member. Not suggesting all elders have that view, by the way, but certainly it's an incredibly sexist, patriarchal organisation, and someone like Henry Grew would fit right in. As for George Storrs, as I point out in my book, The Reluctant Apostate, quick plug, it is my channel after all. There's my book, The Reluctant Apostate, and I devote, I think, 2 or 3 chapters to the history of Jehovah's Witnesses. And I talk about George Storrs because, quite interestingly, and this is something they don't tell you, this is something David Splain won't tell you, even though he probably knows. Interestingly, there was a spat between George Storrs and Charles Taze Russell shortly before George Storrs' death. So, as we saw there, George Storrs died in 1879. That's what it said in the caption. In 1877, so 2 years before George Storrs' death, Charles Taze Russell sponsored the publication of a book titled 3 Worlds. So 3 Worlds, you can actually find a PDF of it. It was a book by Nelson Barber that was essentially bankrolled by Charles Taze Russell, because Charles Taze Russell and Nelson Barber were at that time working together for a brief period. Charles Taze Russell was a co-editor for Nelson Barber's magazine, Herald of the Morning. And Charles Taze Russell sponsored Nelson Barber's book, 3 Worlds, which predicted the second coming of Jesus, you're going to love this, for April 6th, 1878. So April 6th, bear in mind the book was published in 1877, so they weren't giving themselves much time. They were predicting for only the following year from the book's publication for the second coming of Christ. Pretty bold, wasn't it? And George Storrs did a very brief review. Let's read part of it, shall we? This is from the Bible Examiner of July 1877, which was George Storrs' paper. Think of the Bible Examiner as the Watchtower magazine of George Storrs. So George Storrs says, in the Bible Examiner, I received a copy of the above work some time since and have read it with care, portions of it several times. It contains much of interest, which may be read with profit. The chronology is the best I have ever seen, but it is impossible for me to assent to all the conclusions the writer has arrived at as to the events, yet I feel no disposition to oppose his views by way of controversy. A few months will determine the accuracy of the ground he has taken as to the withdrawal of the saints from the earth. Bear in mind, again, he was writing in July 1877, and the second coming of Christ had been predicted for April 6th, 1878. So he was taking the very reasonable view, look, I'm not really down with the predictions necessarily, but hey, in a few months, we'll see whether it's true or not. Apparently, this didn't go down well with Charles Taze Russell, who again had bankrolled the 3 Worlds publication. He didn't write it, he was behind it though. And apparently in Herald of the Morning, Charles Taze Russell replied and wasn't very happy. We don't know exactly what Charles Taze Russell said, because I haven't yet seen a PDF of the article in question, but we know it exists because George Storrs replied in his magazine, the Bible Examiner. Here is the relevant quote from the October 1877 magazine. My criticism, so apparently Charles Taze Russell had accused him of being critical. Actually, it was quite a generous review if you think about it. The chronology is the best I have ever seen. This wasn't good enough for Charles Taze Russell, apparently. My criticism on the above-named work in the July Examiner has called forth a reply by my esteemed brother, Charles T. Russell, in the Herald of the Morning. I understand that Dr. Barber, its editor, does fix definitely the time of the translation of the elect church. He tells us we are in the time of the harvest now, and that sometime in this period the elect are to be translated. In other words, raptured. Yet he does not pretend to know the exact day. But does he not say it will be at or before the harvest ends? And does he not say it ends the 9th day of April next? He may admit it is possible the elect may be translated any time before that day, but suppose they are not, what then? Will they not know the day exactly in which they are to be changed at that day? And would any of them with that knowledge be in the field or in the mill at work, as our Lord tells us they will be when they are taken? I object to the time setting in any limited period, because I believe it is a disregard of our Lord's teaching on the subject, and the disappointments of the past, I think, should teach us it is an error to attempt to do more than to show the return of our Lord from heaven is near, even at the door. and learn to watch and pray that we may be ready at all times to meet him. But no argument that I have ever seen since 1844 has had any effect on my mind to cause me to believe the precise time of the second advent is revealed in the Bible or will be known, unless God gives a new and direct revelation on the subject, which he may or may not, for all that is known. What a reasonable position. If you think about it, this has aged incredibly well. Bear in mind, George Storrs was a follower of William Miller. William Miller had predicted the second coming for 1843 and then 1844, which is why George Storrs mentions 1844, and he uses the word disappointment because 1844 went down in history as the Great Disappointment. People were expecting the second coming. People were expecting to be raptured, and it didn't happen. And George Storrs is here saying, you know what? Enough of this date setting. I mean, you do that if that suits you. But I feel as though my experience of expectation being failed, of predictions failing, informs me that it's an unwise course. We shouldn't need to do that. There is no date. Let's just be content to be Christians, is the message George Storrs is giving there to Charles Taze Russell. And yet notice how David Splain characterizes George Storrs.
Well, Storrs knew that he didn't have the whole truth on every subject. Well, we know that George Storrs had an influence on Charles Taze Russell.
Apparently, George Storrs didn't have enough of an influence on Charles Taze Russell. Actually, David Splain, I think the facts will attest. And as for Storrs knew that he didn't have the whole truth on every subject, he certainly had a lot more truth and wisdom than Charles Taze Russell. Let's be crystal clear on that. If only Charles Taze Russell had listened to George Storrs back then in 1877, 2 years before the Watchtower started to be printed. If only Charles Taze Russell had taken on board some of this wisdom and some of this pragmatism and some of this, whoa, hold on a minute now, let's not put words in the mouths of the Bible writers. Let's not spin scriptures to point to certain years. Let's just be content to be Christians. If only Charles Taze Russell had been influenced more by George Storrs, maybe we wouldn't be in this mess. But it's incredibly disingenuous to, again, hijack the memory of George Storrs, who, again, was not a Jehovah's Witness, and point to George Storrs as being on the highway of holiness or one of the builders of the highway of holiness, when in fact, if anything, George Storrs was here at least condemning precisely the doomsday date setting, the obsession with the end times and Armageddon and judgment that continues to blight the organization to this day. But I'm afraid in terms of this rebuttal, we need to leave it there. I've been going on for ages at this point. Well done for sticking with me. I do just need to call a timeout though, because I'm aware that my videos can be very long and I'd rather break this one up so that it's as digestible as possible. There will also be the sushis, of course, if you, for whatever reason, can't watch these longer rebuttals. But we are going to put the brakes on midway through David Splain's talk. Please tune in the coming days for part 2 of the annual meeting, where we'll discuss the rest of David Splain's talk and the talks that follow. But that's all we have time for. Please don't forget to subscribe to the Lloyd Evans channel for more such videos. And as always, thank you for watching.